Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Dustin Robinson, and I am your host for Investor Hotseat, where we ask the tough questions, the hot questions that CEOs really need to be prepared to answer. Today, we have a great guest. We're going to be talking to the CEO of a company my fund invested in called aNUma, which sits at the intersection of psychedelic medicines and virtual reality. And virtual reality is really an emerging space within the psychedelic space, which is also an emerging space. And our fund has talked to probably dozens of different virtual reality companies, and we're really excited about the work that aNUma is doing. Since this is a show about investing, we have our normal disclaimer. This show is not for the purpose of soliciting investment, and we encourage you to check out our psychedelicinvest.com homepage for the full terms and conditions. The agenda for each of these shows is we're going to start off with a 5-minute presentation from a CEO. That will be followed by a 30-minute Q&A by myself. And then we're going to reserve 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any questions from the audience. So if you have any questions whatsoever, you could just drop them in the chat box. You don't need to wait for the end, but we will make sure we get to them at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gregory Roufa, the CEO of aNUma. Gregory, I'm going to pass it to you for your presentation. You have 5 minutes and you are on the clock.
Great, Dustin. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the Investor Hotseat. I'm very happy to participate here. As mentioned, Dustin's company, eDER, is an investor in my company, aNUma. aNUma is a digital therapeutic company, and we're focused right now on providing experiences and products for people who are facing life-limiting disease. We have a product set of experiences using immersive technology, virtual reality, extended reality, that provide people, along with patients in this case, along with their caregivers and their families, experiences that can help lower the fear that they have around the approaching potential death that they're facing. The background for aNUma, I started aNUma 3.5 years ago. And I was really following 3 threads when I did that. I was chasing after some experiences that I had, formative experiences using psychedelics. I was intrigued by the continued involvement in virtual reality. And I continued development going on there. And I was focused on what can be accomplished in group work, particularly group process work and group psychotherapy. And so in early 2019, I founded aNUma and started learning. I had a career as a technologist and a product designer at a company that I co-founded called Corrigo. We did software as a service for property management companies. And I never thought I would spend that long of my career doing work in facilities and property management, but I enjoyed it there at Corrigo. We had a great time. We sold that company to Jones Lang LaSalle in 2015, and I left there I spent another 3 years with JLL before leaving to form aNUma. So following these threads of psychedelics, group psychotherapy, and virtual reality, I started learning. I met my co-founder, Dr. Joe Hardy. Joe is a cognitive psychologist who has spent most of his career in creating software for people to improve their brains. And Joe and I started doing some work together, some early tests. And that's when we came across our third co-founder, Dr. David Glowacki. And David is a cross-disciplinary scientist, and the technology that we're working on originated in David's lab. And this technology is very unique experiences in virtual reality that give people a sense of themselves, not as corporeal bodies and not as simulated bodies or avatars, but as energetic essences. And what we found is that by going through these experiences, it actually alters people's sense of perspective on themselves, on their own lives, and actually can introduce both trait and behavioral change in the participants. And so we've been building on top of that original data set, and we've built a platform on top of that, and then worked with partners to use our platform to very quickly take different modalities from the real world. These are mainly meditation type, cognitive behavioral type trainings, bring these modalities into the virtual world and provide them in a group-like setting with a live facilitator. We've applied this to a number of different use cases, different group type retreats. We've built 4 different experiences on our platform, and we're working with some other partners currently to build out other experiences for other use cases. But the aNUma focus is now on the opportunity as we see it within end-of-life anxiety, end-of-life distress, including end-of-life depression. I think that brings us up to today. As I think brought up, we're raising seed capital currently. That's where aNUma is. Dustin, you have questions?
Great. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. You got it all in before the 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and thanks for the work you're doing. Obviously, this portion of patients, these end of life patients, are really suffering. So really appreciate the work you're doing, and just wanted to thank you before we jump into those questions. So you talked a little bit. My first question is usually the why and what had got you started in aNUma, but you kind of answered that with your in your introduction. So I'm going to kind of skip over that question and get right to the more technical stuff. So aNUma is an extended reality company, and this is you guys are not delivering psychedelic medicines per se. And obviously this show is about psychedelic companies. So could you describe what the connection is with what you guys are doing with extended reality and psychedelic medicines?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of ways that this intersects with psychedelics. And I think it does start apart from my own story, where I had this formative experience that I think I referred to before, was this experience on LSD, where I saw everybody at a gathering of maybe 100 people. And I saw visually how they were connected, how they were energetic essences that were connected through these tubes and connectors, sort of corporeal tubes that just connected me with you, and you with everybody else, and me with everybody else, including the people who were just walking through the door. And it was this beautiful image of dissolution of the identity piece that we carry around with us so often. So it wasn't like those are the cool kids and those are the stoners and those are the smart kids or whatever, but it was everybody just with heart energy and connecting. And so that actually drove me to investigate virtual reality in the first place, because LSD is an illegal substance, but VR is not. And I thought maybe we could create these type of experiences for people in VR. And so that's really that thread I was pulling on, that I returned to about 3.5 years ago, even though those experiences happened over 30 years ago for me. What we do now, we refer to as pneumadelic, and pneumadelic to differentiate itself from psychedelic. But it's using these immersive technologies. Pneumadelic is a term, that's where the name aNUma comes from, but it's a term coined by my co-founder, David Glowacki. And it refers to spirit manifesting. The translation is spirit manifesting, the word pneuma from the Greek word for breath or life. And so it's the idea of giving people a sense of what their energetic spirit might be like. And there are other types of pneumadelic technologies, at least the way that we think of it. And one very obvious example is the great cathedrals of Europe. You can think of as a pneumadelic technology. When you walk into these places, you're overstruck by awe, and they were designed intentionally to bring people into a state of the awesomeness. In this case, the awesomeness of a specific church. But what we're trying to do is create these experiences, much like psychedelics can create these experiences, that give people a sense of awe, a sense of wonder about the world around them, and helps change their perspective. And we believe we can do this through working from the outside in, from these stimulus, the immersive stimulus affecting the inside of the person, where the psychedelic is working on the biological brain state and making changes. But the experience, what people subjectively go through, is something that is actually the active ingredient here, less so than the mechanism that's causing that experience to arise.
Beautiful. Yeah, I know that when before I had the experience, I was a little bit skeptical about what VR really has in relation to psychedelics, but I went through the experience, and I will say it was absolutely transcendent, and it's really, really hard to put into words. But I'd like to get into the technology, and I'd love for you, if you can, to try to put into words what these experiences are like and what a patient should expect when going through one of these experiences.
I think the best way we describe it right now is a moving meditation. You come together with other people, and they can be based wherever they are in the world, and you build this sense of co-presence. And many people in the audience probably have tried VR, and so it's not that dissimilar from some of the other multiplayer experiences that you can have. But you come together and you're met with a facilitator, and the facilitator takes the group of people and gets them prepared for the journey. And then we take you on a journey, which is engagement, embodied engagement with the other participants, as well as other objects that we bring into the space. And we're making good use of music and good use of movement to bring people into these states. And then after the journey comes down, we do kind of present the overall experience, kind of like a psychedelic journey arc, where there's a bit of a prep, there's a journey, and then there's an integration piece. And so there's often a share at the end of the experiences that people come together and they're talking around a campfire, sort of digital campfire-esque. So I hope does that do it justice?
Yeah. And just to drill down a little bit deeper, I know you mentioned you guys have already created 4 or 5 different types of experiences. So how did those different experiences differ?
So they differ in both the time, the intention behind them, what were the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve, the amount of movement that's involved. Some are much more up tempo, some are a bit more down tempo. One of the experiences is a multi-session virtual retreat that's based in Qigong. Another of the experiences is a very shortened piece that's intended to bring people into a sense of presence. And another experience is really a meditation tool. It's as much as anything, it's a meditation practice. It's a unique meditation practice that's based in some older Tibetan lineage practices, but it's really its own unique thing. And we have a group of people who come together quite regularly and use that as part of their practice. And so there's many different directions it can be taken into. We've created a platform that is a participant app that the participants use. There's a facilitator app that allows the facilitator to control the experience for the participants and to drive it and to make it more up tempo or down tempo. And we also have a creator tool, which allows us, I think, uniquely in VR to very quickly take external modalities and bring them into our world, our metaverse, and build these new experiences. And so we can go from an idea to a fully formed experience in actually a very short period of time, in just a week or 2.
Got it. And so, we looked at a lot of different VR companies, and some of them are really doing beautiful, like just art and visual stuff. What really attracted us to what you guys are doing is how science-backed, the scientific approach that you guys are taking. And I know you guys have had a couple different scientific articles that have been published. Obviously, it's one thing to say, we take LSD and we're trying to recreate that experience, but could you actually talk a little bit about what the actual science is behind these VR experiences and why you believe that scientific research could be helpful for various indications?
Yeah, so there are 2 peer-reviewed journal articles. The most recent one came out in May in Nature Scientific Reports, and these came out of David's lab. And what they it uses a variety of scales that we gave people after they went through our experience to show certain outcomes. And we align these very much with psychedelics, but also some scales that aren't very commonly used in psychedelics. And so the one that's most commonly used in psychedelics is the Mystical Experience Questionnaire, which is used to gauge the intensity of the subjective experience across 4 factors. Factors of unitive experience, ineffability, transcendence of space and time, and positive emotion. And what we showed on that scale was that people going through our 1-hour experience in VR without any substances involved whatsoever, they would score as high as moderate dose psilocybin on that particular scale. And that's not comparing it in any other way to a psilocybin journey, other than to say that we can occasion these so-called mystical type experiences using technology only without any substance involved. In the second paper, we used a number of other scales, including something that's called the inclusion of self and community, a scale of interpersonal connectedness, and something called the ego dissolution inventory. And all of these were specifically designed to, in a group type experience, give people an experience of connection to the others in the space and get them out of their own very much subjective internal state, but get them feeling like they're part of this group and that they're more than just what their self is. And so we use these scales to create what get referred to as self-transcendent experiences, this idea of the individual getting beyond their individual nature and connecting much more intimately with the world around them and the other people around them. And that includes their body, right? That includes connecting much more deeply with their own body. And so we use these scientifically validated, clinically validated scales to judge how effective the experiences are.
And so how many actual people have gone through these experiences, and what are some of the results that you're actually seeing?
So we've had over 500 people go through aNUma sessions, which is over 150 sessions, I think, by now, that we've taken people through. And the results are positive results on those scores, right? An increase in sense of connectedness, an increase of sense of self, more part of community, a sense that I connected with something that was greater than myself. And that's really what we're trying to do as we move into this area of reducing people's fear and anxiety around impending death. And this is applicable to everybody, right? Not just people with life-limiting disease. But death is really something that is, well, for one, it's as intrinsic to life as birth is, right? Everybody's born, everybody's going to die. And yet death has been taken out of our normal day-to-day lives because death has become medicalized. It used to be, over 100 years ago, people would die, and most people would die at home. Most people, at least in the United States, die in acute care facilities today. And we don't think that that's the way it should be. And, other experts who are far more expert on this than I agree that death is something that should be treated as a part of life, and that the proper attitude towards death both can, in certain cases, increase survivability. But I think most importantly, it allows people to make best use of the time that they have remaining. And one of the things that we're trying to do with our experience is give people the ability to leave without regret, or to the degree that that's possible. That's one of our goals, is to give them the ability to really connect with their relationships, and maybe create some repair there, at least open up the opportunity for repair and reconciliation to happen. Because these are some of the most important things that people say as they're approaching death. The most important things for them is to feel like their life has some meaning, and that meaning is most often reflected in the people that they've touched during their lives, and that they've had an opportunity to close some of the loose ends that may have occurred through relationships in their life. And so those are some of the other things that we're trying to do through our experiences.
And so the indication you're talking about, end of life depression and anxiety, I see why you guys decided to focus on that with your technology. What are the other treatment tools that are currently available out there, whether it be medications, tools for people who are currently suffering with that indication, and are they effective, and why do you believe that your digital therapeutic will be more effective for this particular indication?
So standard of care, at least as I understand it, is psychotherapy, different types of cognitive behavioral therapy, and psychopharmacology, which is typically antidepressive medicines or anti-anxiolytics, benzodiazepams, SRSRIs. Our understanding, again, I'm not an expert in this, but our understanding is that this psychopharmacology is not the most effective, particularly given the timescales that we're looking at around this. And quite often, people who are feeling very anxious are quite difficult to work with, and it creates an impact on the entire structure who is there to support them going through this. But if you can lessen their fear, That's often fear of suffering. If you can lessen their fear and lessen their anxiety around this, then it actually helps everybody else and helps them get better care, and they're going to be better served in the end. And so um, the reason that we feel like what we can do can actually be effective in this is the great literature that's been produced around psychedelics in this space. And so we've been very heartened by the work of Roland Griffiths and the work of Stephen Ross at NYU on applying psychedelics at end of life to help people create meaning around their life. And it's shown significant improvement on these same scales that I mentioned before, along with a number of other scales. But because our understanding is that the experiences, subjective experiences that people go through while under psychedelics are what's effective in creating these changes, and we can occasion those same types of experiences without using psychedelics, then we can be effective in this. And so, if it were my parents, when my parents approached this time, I know I would like them to. Neither of them have tried psychedelics in the past, but I know that psilocybin would be my first choice for people if they were having extreme anxiety around end of life, because I just know, I have seen personally how effective that can be, particularly in getting people connected. But as you know, psychedelics are still illegal currently, although we hope that will change soon. And they're very expensive to deploy. And not all people are going to be ready to take psychedelics, even though they may be in very distressed situations. And so what we believe we can do is provide something that can be much more readily available as a tool for medical professionals to bring to bear in these cases, and to help, again, smooth the whole patient journey for everybody involved.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of the work out of NYU being done around psilocybin for end-of-life distress. Company Reset Pharma is currently doing clinical trials around psilocybin for end-of-life distress. And you also talked about, this being just a different option, right? But, have you guys played around with the idea of potentially combining psychedelics with your virtual reality, and what does that type of experience look like?
So we think there's huge promise in doing this, and in using immersive technology to create both the proper mindset going in as a preparation tool, as well as to provide a proper setting and to provide, in some ways, guardrails around the psychedelic journey, so that they can become more reliable and more reliably have certain outcomes. We've done some experiments ourselves internally. We ran a retreat in Portugal where we could do this totally above board. And we were intending to actually run a citizen science data collection experience of what we refer to as a combination therapy, a low dose psychedelic along with the virtual reality technology. And what we saw at the retreat, even though we were using very low doses of psychedelics, we were also we were mostly involved with people who were expert scientists who study psychedelics, where most of the population ran a population of 16 this experience. And 4 of the 16 had breakthrough experiences to the degree that we believed that the citizen science project that we had imagined and we were planning to run would not be ethical to do outside of a clinical setting. And as a startup, we just certainly don't have the funds for that. We'd love to do work in that area and think the potential is huge. And we intend to do that work down the road. But it's an area that requires a large investment of time and attention to specifically what's being used, and that the proper support individuals, much along the lines of what's required for psychedelic clinical therapy, be in place. And that's, as you know, very, very cost intensive.
And so one of the things I realized when I did the experience with aNUma is that there is a lot of movement. So there's moving of arms, there's standing, there's sitting. I'm a relatively healthy guy, so I was able to get through it pretty well. But I couldn't help but to think about end of life patients who perhaps aren't in the best physical condition at the time of doing this therapy. So do you think some of the movement could cause any sort of issues? And if so, are you guys doing anything to address that specifically with end of life patients?
Of course. So, the experience that you went through was not designed for end of life patients, and the experiences that we're in the process of designing right now take that into consideration. And we've done some rather remarkable new developments, new features that help with the accessibility of the experience. And we don't enter into these experiences with any sort of expectations around the patient's ability to be mobile. And so we really can conform to a situation where somebody can't even lift their head off the bed. And so we have the ability to integrate them into a experience and have engagement with them, even though they may not be able to move at all. So absolutely, yeah, we're designing around that.
And so a lot of the audience might be familiar with FDA drug approval process. We've had a lot of drug companies that are going through FDA clinical trials or Health Canada, whatever particular jurisdiction. You guys are going a different path with a digital therapeutic, which is a totally different path from FDA drug approval. The FDA has a specific path when it comes to digital therapeutics, and it's really an emerging space, and a lot of exciting things are happening around digital therapeutics. So could you give the audience just a little bit of background of what that FDA pathway looks like and what the timeline looks like as well?
Yeah, so I'll certainly try. What the FDA is concerned with, obviously they're concerned with the safety and the efficacy of what somebody goes through. And so putting novel compounds or into somebody's body can cause safety issues. And so very different than a drug. We're using off-the-shelf technology that's approved for consumer use every day. What is important and what the FDA really regulates is the claims that you can make about what you're doing. And if you want to be able to make any sort of medical claims, then you do need to have FDA clearance. And that's what we're going for is FDA clearance. Not so much because that's required, because we can certainly deliver our products to the professionals who can use them as needed today. But because ultimately our goal is to get payer reimbursability, to get insurance, and in particular Medicare, to reimburse for this. And in order to do that, the FDA clearance is a direct path to having an evidence base that can get you to that insurer reimbursability. It's a long path, but the path for medical devices and getting FDA clearance for medical devices is very well worn. And as you referred to, in the last 5 to 7 years, software as a medical device has been increasingly well understood. And within the last year, we've had the first VR experience, VR product approved or cleared for FDA. And so we expect that to be a multi-year process. Where we will be able to get that clearance sometime in late 2024, early 2025.
And you mentioned it'll take a few years. What's interesting on the drug development side, it could take anywhere from like 7 to 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars. So obviously this for digital therapeutics, it's a shorter time frame. Could you give us an idea of how much capital is required? Obviously the drug development, very, very capital intensive, could take hundreds of millions of dollars. On the digital therapeutic side, how does that compare from a cost perspective?
My understanding, and this is not my expert, my co-founder, Joe Hardy, is an expert in this area. And we've got a budget out there that goes through multiple capital raises. We're in a capital raise right now that will allow us to get to a certain set of evidence. that we can bring to the table, but these won't be randomized controlled trials. And in order to get to that FDA clearance, the key there is that we have randomized controlled clinical trials, and that these clinical trials can prove the efficacy and the outcomes on these scales. I mentioned a number of these scales before, against the placebo. And so we will have multiple raises. The budgets will be in flux, but it is not in the hundreds of millions, but it is in the tens of millions eventually, in order to get all the way through and to get that Medicare billing codes.
And so let's talk a little bit about like the clinical trial design. I don't know where you guys are exactly at with respect to the clinical trial design, but how are you guys kind of setting this up? How many sessions, over what time period, what type of outcomes are you looking to measure? Any information you give us on what you plan to do in these clinical trial designs?
So we're talking specifically here about the clinical design, the clinical protocol for reduction of end-of-life anxiety and end-of-life depression. And the actual protocols are still a work in progress, and we don't expect to be in clinical trials well into next year. So Q2 or Q3 next year, where we will begin those. We do expect it to be multiple sessions that take place over the course of a fairly short time period. So 3 to 4 sessions over 2 to 3 weeks time period is what we're aiming for. We've got a number of different scales. I mentioned the mystical experience questionnaire, the inclusion of self and community. There's a communitas scale. There's a number of different depression scales. The Beck Depression Inventory is one that we looked at. The Hamilton Anxiety, multiple scales there. We're working with academics who are experts in this area to design the path that gets us the measurements, the metrics that we need most efficiently, and with minimizing the amount of overhead required of both pre-sessions and post-sessions from data collection. Beyond the scales that we use, and all of them will be clinically validated scales. Beyond that, we're looking at physiological measurements, which include fMRI and EEG measurements in the same area.
Great. And I have just a few more questions. So if anyone in the audience, you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the box. If you don't have any questions, that's all good. I'll just keep asking my questions. So next question is about your competition. You mentioned that there's been a VR company that has gotten FDA clearance as a digital therapeutic. And it seems like there's kind of this kind of, I don't want to call it an explosion, but there has been an emergence of other companies trying to build VR as a digital therapeutic. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys differentiate yourselves from some of the other VR companies?
There's a few ways that we differentiate ourselves, but I think the way that we approach this is that there's a huge problem generally in the world right now with a mental health and wellness crisis. And we think that in part technology is responsible for some of that, for driving some of that. But we also believe that technology can be part of the solution to that. And so we're at a point where we welcome all comers, because everybody is working in slightly different areas. And we're friends with these people, with these other companies. And there's more than enough work to go around. We see us being still in the early innings of the whole extended reality game. It's far from over. We welcome the next hardware revs to come down the pipe. Meta and Apple and Sony and others are pouring billions of dollars into the technology, and so I don't even like to think about it from a competitive standpoint right now. We know the path that we're on, and that path includes certainly building a defensible moat, which is a combination of the proprietary technology, the proprietary experiences, the data that we collect, and the specific outcomes and indications that we're aiming for. But yeah, you do want to be paranoid as a CEO that you don't have your lunch eaten for you, but there's so much need for this stuff out there that it's less about competition. It's more about how can we work together in a way that's most beneficial for everybody, because there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of need.
Absolutely. And so, we keep kind of flipping around between these words of VR and extended reality. And I know, earlier in the year, there was all this excitement around the metaverse, and there's talk about augmented reality. So maybe just not even really necessarily with respect to aNUma, or you could loop in aNUma, but how do you see this whole extended reality industry developing? I know right now you're focused on VR. Do you see aNUma eventually getting into AR, metaverse, all these other different types of extended reality that we're starting to hear about?
I think it's moving so quickly. I don't think anybody really knows. I think the things that we can agree on is that the current devices are uncomfortable for many people to wear for a long time. And that there's better display form factors to come down the road. And however those displays get, there's some very cool technologies coming out, but I don't think anybody really knows the final form factor that's really going to make extended reality a hit. Extended reality is this term, I think it's Jaron Lanier who created it. But it's this idea that there is a spectrum of experiences, from no digital overlay to completely immersive virtual reality, where everything is simulated. And in the middle of this whole spectrum of extended reality, you have things like augmented reality. And so that augmented reality involves layering in, providing a digital layer over the world that you actually inhabit. We actually think that this is the way that we want to be going. And we actually think that the most mainstream of the applications will, at least I hope, will be more augmented reality, where people are engaged with the real world and they just have cooler opportunities to play with that world, but they're playing with the real world and they're not sitting on a couch someplace and being completely sedentary and have all this passive enjoyment happen to them, but they're actually out in the real world with real other people, maybe separated by distance, but they're out there actually engaging with the real spatial world that's all around us. The opportunities are endless. I don't think anybody has a real clue about where it will all end up. Some great science fiction on the topic. What we're interested in doing is continuing to create great experiences that are as agnostic to the hardware platform as possible, so that we can learn what makes for great engagement, what makes for good experiences, and that we can be there on the platforms as the hardware technology continues to evolve.
So next milestones for aNUma, what should we be expecting out of you guys in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 years?
Yeah, so we're working on closing a seed round right now, and we are looking to, we're working with clinical partners in bringing out the first end-of-life program for us, which will be available in September, and we'll be trialing that, just internal trials on a low volume basis through the rest of this year, with a target to have some evidence in hand from these early non-clinical type trials, to show that we're in the right direction, that we're achieving the outcomes that we want to achieve, that are the important long-term outcomes for getting that FDA clearance and for getting the payer reimbursability, where we will need to come back out next year and raise more money to actually enter into those trials. And of course, we're applying for funding in other ways to help support the trials through the various scientific grants that are available.
And your team, you talked a little bit about your 3 founders. Any other stuff you want to talk about with respect to those guys, and any other members of your advisory board or any other members of your team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm truly honored and blessed with the people who are around us. Joe is a fantastic partner, who is just really smart and a really good person. And he's done some amazing work. He was head of R&D for Lumos Labs, the makers of the Lumosity brain training app. And he probably knows as well as anybody how to create games and gamify experiences for people that are good for their brains. David continues his academic work, at least for now, until aNUma is off and flying high, in which point he, I think, intends to leave academia. We're not sure. Nobody is really sure, not even him. But David works out of CTIS, which is the English name is the Center for Intelligent Technologies, and it's based at the University of Santiago de Compostela, Spain. And we've got a lab there. It's his lab that we get to use, and it's probably the world's most advanced labs for doing this sort of multi-user experience design. We have just a really incredible team of developers and artists who work in conjunction with us. Mostly these are contractors right now as we're pulling them on. And we've got one of the best advisory boards that I've seen, which includes Dr. Robin Carr-Harris, who I think will be familiar to most of the folks in this audience. Robin is moved here to the University of California, San Francisco. Robin's become a friend, and he's been incredibly helpful. Honestly, he's one of the principal investigators on our grants. And Adam Ghazali. Adam is also at UCSF. Adam runs the Neuroscape lab. Has been incredibly helpful, and many of your audience may know Adam, but he co-founded a company called Achille Labs, and Achille is one of the leaders in digital therapeutics, and they have a product for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so Adam's been helpful. Anne-Marie Keppel wrote a book called Death Nesting. She is a leading figure in how to bring sort of the lineages of death back into the contemporary world. And we're working with a slew of oncologists and palliative care doctors in both locally as well as in hospitals around the country. Some of these are relationships that have not yet been announced and that are still in the works of being solidified exactly how we're going to work with them. But we've got a tremendous team. I could not have, when I started this 3.5 years ago, I could not have imagined a more perfect team of people to work with. It's really amazing.
That's great. Yeah, and we really enjoyed working with your team as well. So if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, maybe they're interested in trying the aNUma experience, or they just want to learn more about aNUma, where should they go? If you want to share your email address or website, any information if people want to learn more about what you guys are doing at aNUma.
Sure. Go to aNUma.com is the best place to check it out. We will welcome to reach out to me personally, but the way they'll get responded to most directly is if follow the info request there and reach out. We do have limited availability of the experiences right now, but would love to share them. And we really enjoy doing that. We want to get it out to more folks, and so that's why closing the seed round is important for us, because it allows us to scale up that actual operations to get more people to go through these experiences.
Great. Yes. And we have no questions, so we're going to end it there. Greg, you did a great job. You lasted through the hot seat. Congratulations. And really appreciate you spending the time on the show, and really appreciate all the work you're doing. So thank you so much.
Of course, Dustin, thank you. Thank you for all your support, for allowing me to be part of this. And look forward to many more.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Everyone have a good evening. Hope everyone enjoyed the show, and we will see you in 2 more Thursdays from today. Have a good one.
Bye.